الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا قاسم النبي سيد المصلين بالقاسم مصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحاب القر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وكنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون. صدق الله العظيم. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: لا يدخل الجنة قطات. Can we start with the salawats ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad?
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today I'd like to talk about the sins of the tongue. We'd like to start with a tafsir of what I just recited from Surah Al-Mu'minun, Surah 23 in the Quran. The ayah that I recited was ayah number 3, and the translation is, "And they who turn away from ill speech." The Surah Mu'minun, is starting with a description of what a mu'min is. The reason that the surah is revealed, therefore, is to describe a righteous Muslim, a mu'min, a true believer in Islam. And one of the attributes that a true believer has is to not allow ill speech to come from their mouth. The surah also mentions the creation of humanity, the story of Hazrat Nuh alayhi salam, and an anti-sectarian message. In the story of Hazrat Nuh, we can also see that there's an importance in tabligh and the ability to practice tabligh. Tabligh is the transmission and evangelism of Islam to the community between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. We see that Hazrat Nuh alayhi salam, he goes and tries to give hidayah to a people who are completely lost from Islam. In the end, the ark that he escaped the floods from had very few people on it, very little number of people compared to the society at the time. The specific ayah that I recite, therefore, tells us avoid ill speech coming from your mouth. And therefore, we will talk about how we can avoid ill speech and the potential implications of not preventing ill speech from our mouths. One of the impacts is the destruction of the community and the nuclear family structure. And indeed the wider family structure that we, in our tradition, embrace. For example, when there is dissension between a community, it often comes out of gossip. We see that people at home or in the masjid or wherever they are, they gossip frequently, passively, as though there's nothing wrong with it. However, one of the major impacts of this is that in the community, like we saw yesterday, in the time of Sina Zani, because of the Zanjir there was gossip, because of the Zanjir there was gossip and there was ill speech and there were insults flying around. But indeed, we should have been in the state of ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similarly, in the community, in the setting up of masajid and of madrasas, there's often a lot of gossip and a lot of nonsense that comes into play because of ill speech. An inability to control what we say, insults. This goes against the tenets of Islam and brings you outside of what's considered a mu'min. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam spread the Quran with the same tongue that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you and I. Hazrat Nuh, all of the Anbiya and the Ahl Bayt spread Islam through the same words and the same speech that we have the ability to portray today. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we see, within the first 5 hours of the day of Ashura, he attempts to make tabligh, and he attempts to bring the people of the worst army in the world in history into the side of the Muslims. And indeed he succeeds with dozens of men. Khawar ibn Yazid is the most famous of them, but there were dozens of men who come because Imam Hussein uses the speech that Allah has given us. Like I said the other night, the hidayah and the knowledge and the speech is not ours to keep, it's an amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have an obligation to use this to do tabligh to the others in the community. Indeed, it's specifically important for us. And this is a very, very crucial point. Because as Shia, we are a minority in every single community. A minority within a minority. Especially Afghan Shia. There's no representation within the UK. Barely any. Therefore, we need to make ourselves able to defend Islam, not only against the kuffar, but also against other Muslims who attempt to make attacks against us. We need to be able to justify the religion of Islam and our practices. And if we can't justify them, we have to ask ourselves, why do we do these things? Because if you're praying and you're doing sin as an Eid, but you can't defend it and you can't articulate it, then it doesn't make sense because you don't truly understand what you're doing. Even if you can't articulate to someone else, you should be able to articulate it to yourself. Rationalize, what am I doing in this majlis? We see from the sisters, through the whole majlis we can hear gossip and laughter. This is ill speech, especially within a majlis. It's the worst kind of ill speech. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us one of the ways that we can avoid ill speech is through dhikr and through constant reminders of the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The tasbih that we do after salat, this is not just for after salat. We can do it all the time. We see some of the uncles, they have the tasbih all the time. It's attached to their hand. This is a good sign. It's one of the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It's one of the sunnah of Rasulullah. Because he tells us and he shows us that when you are constantly reminding yourself, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillah, we slowly allow our spirituality to take over. Some of the communities, the Muslims, the Sufis, they do dhikr to the extent where they attain higher spirituality. They use dhikr to attain higher spirituality. We can use dhikr to reduce the ill speech. Because if you're remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you're not remembering gossip, you're not remembering ill speech. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, like, salawat. Imam Ja'far, he says, murderers, habitual drunkards, and those who go to and fro bearing tales will not enter paradise. Therefore, the one who gossips and causes dissension amongst the Muslims, causes fitna, is on the same level as the habitual drunkard. We have to make these comparisons for ourselves because sometimes there are sins which are normalized. Riba, for example, gossip, these things are normalized. However, Imam Ja'far says, the one who gossips and causes fitna in the community is the same as the habitual drunkard. We look at the drunk, we say this man is disgusting. We look away from them, we turn away, we walk away from them. We avoid them in the street. But we engage in gossip actively, we seek it. Therefore, we need to look towards dhikr instead of gossip. Similarly, slander is another of the types of ill speech. Slander of another Muslim especially, but also slander and judgment of other people in society. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he goes and speaks to the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad. Today we do la'an on these people. And these are the worst of mankind. But Imam Hussein alayhi salam goes to them and says, come to my message, join me. We're not in the position to judge other Muslims. We're in the position to guide them. We should use our speech to guide each other, to help each other understand the religion of Islam and the message of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. There's a crucial point that through dhikr we can do one very important thing. I mentioned the other night, the foundation of Islam and Abrahamic religions is Tawheed. We move away from the polytheism that was engaged in the period of Jahiliyyah amongst the Meccans and across the world, the pagans. Even in the UK there were pagans as well, everywhere around the world. By reciting La ilaha illallah, we remind ourselves of the oneness of our God. And we remind ourselves of Tawheed, and through doing this, we can become of the people of Jannah. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, he says that every time you recite La ilaha illallah, it goes directly to heaven. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes every single La ilaha illallah and He turns that into blessings for your akhirah. And He also, through that that La ilaha illallah, we can attain spirituality, which can help us within this dunya as well. Therefore, in the worldly matters, when we remind ourselves of Allah, we can move away from the things which distract us from the cause of Allah and from the cause of self-betterment. We find that things like gossip, things like slander, waste our time. Hours gone when we could help use this to build the community, to build ourselves, to build wealth, as I have mentioned the Imams did in their time as well. Therefore, the overall message that I'd like to portray in this, and the hadith that I mentioned before as well, in the beginning of the lecture, La yudkhil al-jannah, you do not enter Jannah, which is the ultimate goal in this life, if you gossip. The one who gossips, the one who engages in ill speech, sins of the tongue, does not enter Jannah. And you are amongst the people of the hellfire if you engage in these activities. Therefore, we should not allow sins of the tongue to take over. They cause a progressive erosion of the Muslim way of life. They cause dissension, fitna within the community. We have the Afghan community, they have 6 mosques in close proximity. The Khojas, they have multiple mosques, when these will all be united into one strong community which can fight against the problems within our society today. Similarly, in Afghanistan now, there are people who try to subject the good speech of Rasulullah and Imam Hussein alayhi salam to oppression. Why? Because when you use this speech to talk against oppression and to talk against the problems in society, those who are the oppressors, they fight against it. They know the power that the speech has. The speech is the one that inspires the jabba of the mujahideen. The speech is the one that inspires people to fight against oppression. It's also a distraction from seeking knowledge. So in order to avoid the distraction from seeking knowledge, in order to avoid problems within the community, and in order to avoid the erosion of the Muslim way of life, we should aim to keep ourselves among those who are the friends of the Ahlul Bayt. Because Rasulullah says, the one who gossips, he likens him to the one who hates the believer. If you gossip, you hate a mu'min. You hate Rasulullah, you hate the Ahlul Bayt, the message that they portray. Therefore, we should try to avoid these things. Though they are enticing, we should try to avoid the sins of the tongue, for they are often normalized. وَالصَّلَوَاتُ عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ.